All right. Hello, everybody. I guess first, before we get started, can people hear me and see me and see the presentation? I'm seeing some yeses, so we're good. All right. Great. So my name is Derrick Enslow, and I'm the Health Promotion Manager here at 15 Wing Moose Jaw.
And I am Laura Polyjay. I'm the Mental Performance Manager also at Moose Jaw.
And so today Laura's going to lead a presentation on change management, dealing with a new lifestyle. And from our discussions before, Laura, your presentation is very interactive, so we'll be looking for people to participate in the chat room. If you do want to say anything, you can make your mic active, and that will allow you to talk. So you can do that, and yeah, or just ask questions, or as we go along, whatever Laura, she'll pose some questions to you. You can just put that in the chat room. And just a few logistical items. I guess because a lot of people are using this platform, Demio, and other online platforms, there is a possibility that we may lose a connection because that's happened a few times because so many people are using it right now. So if that happens and we go offline, just wait for about 5 minutes max and we should be able to get back online. If it's more than 5 minutes, then something else has happened and we'll try to adjust it. But hopefully oh, someone just said we just lost you. Video and audio, is it just me? Okay, let me ask again. Can people see and hear us? Okay, so I guess it's just that person. Okay. So again, title of the presentation is Change Management, Dealing with a New Lifestyle. So just I'm just going to start just with a little disclaimer and then I'll hand it over to Laura. So this presentation, it is the property of the Department of National Defense, so it will be recorded, but any retransmission of the slides, it's strictly forbidden. Some topics may be of a sensitive nature, so may not be appropriate for children, so just be aware for that. So just a little bit of parental discretion. Definitely share if you have any stories to share, information to share, do that during this webinar. But it will be kept confidential and will not be discussed outside of this webinar. And these webinars, again, are being recorded, and all of the webinars will be available for viewing later on at the CAF Connection website. So we definitely encourage your participation. You can follow along, but if there's anything you have to say, there is the video and microphone functions that are available, or you can just, as I said earlier, just comment in the chat section. So without further ado, I'm going to interject throughout, but Laura's going to lead the presentation, so I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Derrick. So just to give everybody a really quick overview of what we could expect in today's webinar is we're going to go over what is change management, experiences that accompany change, and ultimately how to positively manage change, because really that's what we're looking for. As Derrick mentioned, there are going to be some questions and some activities throughout this webinar. I'm a very hands-on person when it comes to my presentations, and you'll see that translate into this course today. So I'm going to give everybody about a minute. You will need at some point a piece of paper or several pieces of paper and a pen or a pencil. So I'll allow everybody to go and get that if you need it. So we'll just wait a minute so everybody has a chance to do that before we really dive into the content.
Just while we're waiting there, I think for all of us, what we're experiencing right now is a big change. And Laura's going to address that today. And I know for me personally, just starting out, it was sort of like the first week, it's like, oh, what's going to happen? How's this going to work? And then as time went along, it's been, okay, this is a new reality now, and it's going to go on longer than probably a lot of people anticipated. And so these changes are something we need to adjust to, and Laura's going to help us through that and hopefully make the adjustment a bit more easier as we go on for weeks and months and hopefully years. But So yeah, it'll be a good discussion.
Great. So hopefully everybody has stuff that they need. And if anything, you could also type on your computer, on Word, or in notes if you're a computer person. So let's get started. And I'm going to start with a question right away. So in this chat section, what does change mean to you? And put it out to everybody out there. Just to answer, Hannah, we cannot see or hear you. Okay, so we got the deviation from the norm, uncomfortable. Yeah. Adaptation. Frustration, discomfort, opportunity. Manageable, foreseen. Yeah, so we got a couple of different answers coming in, which is great. And some of them include, more along the lines of thoughts and emotions that can accompany change. And we'll actually get into that in a couple of slides. But, I wanted to look directly online and look up what does change mean. And this is straight out of Webster Dictionary. So to make different, to undergo transformation, transition, or substitution, or to make radically different. And as you can see, bullet 1 and bullet 3 are pretty much the same, but I really wanted to include those two definitions because change can be big or small. And that highlights it there in the radically different. In this case, when we're talking about what we're all dealing with right now in the situation with COVID-19 and this self-isolation and working from home, I think we could all say that it's a pretty big change and not a small one. But really, at the end of the day, how people experience change, what that change is going to be really different for everybody, for the individual. So yeah, some people might have an easier time adapting to this change that maybe in a previous work environment, they're used to working from home, so they fell right into this. Others haven't. I personally have never had a job that I was able to work from home, so that transition was a transition for me. I didn't have all the stuff that I needed that's usually in my office, setting up that area at my house so I could work at home in a comfortable way and I have everything I need. So the change could be big or small. And so moving on to change management. Okay, so switching it up a little bit, what does change management mean to you guys? I like that from Jessica, just doing it. Finding solutions, method of handling change, contingency planning. Finding different workable strategies that allow adaptation, dealing with change in a healthy way. I like that one. Finding skills and ways to adapt healthily and effectively. Yeah, because those are important words, healthy and effectively, because at some point we could all adapt to change, but are we doing it in a healthy way with healthy behaviors? Are we doing it effectively, right? It's that idea of what does that change look like in that ideal situation, and are we getting there in the right way?
I think as well, yeah, sorry to interrupt there. I think, what works for one person may not work for someone else. So I think you need to find what works for you. And that may mean, something may work initially, you may have to adjust again. Just even my working environment at home. I was set up in one area of our house and that wasn't really working. I didn't feel like I was getting anything done. So I needed a bit more of a secluded area and just, time to be able to work on that. So yeah, we're talking about change, but you may need to change numerous times depending on what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key message to pick up on what Derrick said, is that you need to think how this is going to work for you. And that's a really big message, because a lot of webinars, they're really great method to give out this information and get that gain general knowledge. But at the end of the day, you need to figure out, okay, how am I going to make this knowledge work for me? And near the end, we're going to go over different strategies. But again, you're going to have to ask yourself that question. Okay, out of these strategies, what works best for me and my needs in my environment? So we got some really great answers coming in. So finding ways to manage resistance to change, right? That's also a really key concept that we need to consider. So when we think about change management, right here on the slide, how we direct, prepare, equip, and provide support to ourselves or others in order to successfully adopt change. And we need to think of it both in a personal and organizational manner. If you were to look up change management on Google, and even if you add in change management and individual, you're going to get a lot of literature on the organization. Organizational psychology deals a lot with change management, and this might be interesting for those of you on this participating today who are in leadership roles, to help your employees and coworkers deal with that change. But with the focus of today's webinar, we're going to take these strategies and how do I apply it for me, the individual? But again, for those of you who are in leadership roles, taking it a step further, and how can I bring this to help my employees and my colleagues manage this change? So question number 3. We kind of already saw some of these answers come up earlier when I asked you what is change, but think about a time that you went through change. Could be something in the past, could be what you're dealing with right now, but what are some of those emotions, feelings, or thoughts that are associated with change? What are you feeling right now in this situation, dealing with this new environment? Yeah, we're getting some really good answers in. So anxiety, uncertainty. Fear of stability and outcome. Depression. I know with myself dealing with this, there's a little bit of anxiety, right? Not knowing what it's like to work from home. So that uncertainty. Yeah, racing mind. Also a sense of being lost a little bit too. At the beginning, there was the feeling of, I don't really know what to do right now with my time, right? What about you, Derrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know what's up there, but I think definitely the stress that is created by this is something that, especially if you haven't had developed good coping skills previously to deal with stressful situations, then it can become even more magnified. And not saying that if you don't have good coping mechanisms to deal with the stress, that it's a lost cause, because it definitely is not. But then trying to find something that works for you, so that when these changes occur, that the stress you're experiencing will still experience the stress, but you're able to deal with it and cope with that stress.
Yeah. And stress is a key word, because, when we talk about change management, there's a lot of things that are entailed with that. But one of the most common, emotions or experiences that are associated with change management is stress. So a lot of times you'll see crossover into stress management. So whoever participated in the stress management webinar, was it last week or about 2 weeks ago? You might see some crossover in some of those strategies that you can use that's also work in this arena as well.
I see a few others that came up there. I'm not sure, maybe Laura, or maybe Arun can explain fear of post-change and its effects. Not, I guess maybe once this is all over, what things are going to look like afterwards. That's probably maybe what a run means there in the chat room there.
That's the idea that I got as well. Yeah, because definitely when things start to go back to normal, it's definitely not going to just be like the light switch that you turn on and it's right away. It is going to be a transition, and it might look different, right? Yeah. So what does that look like? What is that experience is going to be? I like a comment that Jessica put on a positive note: freedom of no interruptions and comfort of home. Definitely can focus a little bit more without having people coming into the office asking questions and whatnot. You can regulate your communication a little bit more, so you can have set times. So when we talk about change, it's not always a bad thing, right? But really the idea that coming up from that question is just knowing that change is associated with a lot of different thoughts and emotions. You know, it's not just a nice straight line that, okay, this is how it's going to go. It gets very squiggly. So there might be fear of that change, rejection, denial, right? Not wanting to change, anger and frustration, confusion, not really knowing what's going on, especially at the beginning when we weren't really sure who's essential, who's not essential. Can I still work from home? For those of you who are in the training system, that is a big question mark, right? When are we going to be able to get back to training so I can get my qualifications? But it can also be exciting and happy and joyful, and change can sometimes be a good thing, right? There's a lot of uncertainty right now, but at the same time, there's a lot of positives that are coming out. If you look at, the world and society, about people helping others, the environment, there are things that, it's not all bad, right?
There's a comment that just came up there: changing our whole society, country, government. I mean, we keep hearing that, we want to get back to normal. We want to get back to work. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Well, what will that look like? And that in itself, and I think that goes back to the previous comment about, posts, what everything's going to look like. And that in itself is stressful. I mean, it'll be a new normal. Will it mean that, when we go out in public, we all have to wear face masks? Maybe that'll be mandatory. Who knows? And that in itself could create some anxiety for people. And just in terms of being able to, how freely we can move around, or even, go to a park or somewhere in your neighborhood, will there be controls on that? So I think we're dealing with the changes now from what we were used to before to what we're working at now, but the post part of it is probably going to look completely different for a while anyway. Maybe we'll get back to whatever normal is, but it's still a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this quote over here, or excerpt, if you want to call it, is straight from more the neurofeedback literature, but I think it's applies very much to here and what we're experiencing. So it's by Green and his colleagues. Every change in the physiological state is accompanied by an appropriate change in mental and emotional state, conscious or unconscious. And conversely, every change in the mental and emotional state, conscious or unconscious, is accompanied by an appropriate change in the physiological state. So really what this is saying is that, our body and mind is connected. When we experience that change, whether it's a physical change or emotional or mental change, it's going to affect us both ways, right? So again, it's kind of linking back to stress and how stress affects the body. How we're thinking and feeling about this change can impact our physiology, right? If we're experiencing that stress response because of that change, then, we might experience times of increased heart rate, blood pressure, increased breathing rate. Those are all associated with that stress response. And those emotions that we mentioned earlier, the anxiety, maybe a little bit of depression, right? Because we're not used to this type of social distancing or self-isolation. So just knowing that whether it's coming from a physical domain, mental or emotional, it's impacting us as a whole. And the need to be aware of that and understand that is really key. So this is the first exercise in place that you're going to need your pen and paper. And raising self-awareness is a really important aspect in a lot of domains, right? Self-awareness, in my opinion, is really the key to understanding, how I work, what my needs are, right? So the first question I'm asking you guys to write out on your paper is, what thoughts and or feelings come up when you think about this self-isolation and this new work environment? In other words, during this time of self-isolation, how's that making you feel, and what thoughts come up? So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to write that out. And as you write this out, feel free, if you want to, you can share it in the chat, but just know that it's not mandatory. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, I know. For me, I don't know. You feel trapped. I think that's a thought that, and a feeling that comes up with me over and over again, that you want to go out, but you don't know. And I mean, maybe it's probably not as restrictive right here now in Saskatchewan as other areas. You've seen people still go to parks and that sort of thing. And they talk about social distancing, but you still have in the back of your mind, should I just stay inside? Should I go out at all? And of course, now the weather is getting nice. And so, yeah, you just, maybe that feeling of being inside, feeling a little bit trapped comes up from time to time.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael S., for sharing. Make me feel useless. I can definitely connect with that one, especially at the beginning. A lot of my work is hands-on and meeting with people. So that first, I want to say, week and a half of working from home, it was I really felt useless.
Yeah, I like the one. I think it is, the personal interactions we have, whether it's with friends, coworkers. Someone said sadness from the lack of those personal interactions. For sure, you miss it, because we're used to having that. And yeah, it does definitely create, you get upset about that. And so hopefully, social media is great and we can communicate that way and do video chats, but it's not the same as that personal contact.
Yeah, and we're getting some more. Thank you, first of all, everyone, for sharing. I know this is not always, it's not always easy to share some of these feelings that we're talking about. So thank you for that. Just some other comments during this self-isolation. I'm discovering myself. For a lot of people, there's a lot more time on our hands, right? So I think it's a really positive aspect of this is figure out, what were my hobbies before I got lost in the sea of work that, keeps piling on in the work environment. So that's something really positive and great to see. Getting back in touch with people that you've lost touch in the past, just because, life happens. Frustrated by the lack of, leadership, or not necessarily leadership, but guidelines from leadership. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a couple slides when we're looking from an organizational standpoint and what are some key aspects to include in helping employees with change management. Having work that you cannot accomplish at home. Yes, being in this environment, we all have some sensitive documents that we can't really work on if we don't have a work laptop or access to a secure network.
I think the one there, disruption in short and long-term goals and projects. And I know for us, we just got a health and wellness working group off the ground in Moose Jaw, and this happened. And so that's kind of been put on the back burner. So that's, any disruption, whether projects, whatever they may be, is definitely frustrating. And hopefully, any momentum that was gained in projects or work that can be, if not worked on while working from home, taken back up when we eventually return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is an important exercise to do, again, to highlight what you're experiencing, because then it puts you back in the driver's seat, so to speak. So we're talking about change management. On this first bullet, that question is, what about this change is causing us stress? And we start to answer that in raising that self-awareness exercise of what are the emotions I'm experiencing, the thoughts, the feelings, any sort of affect really. And when we know what our source of stress is, it gives us the power to choose the strategies that would best suit that situation. So some common sources of stress that we already mentioned in the chat here is uncertainty of the situation, right? When are we going to be able to go back to work? No one knows right now. Perceived control over the situation. It's not really up to us, right? And what can we or can't we do about this? And the novelty of it all, the newness of this. I think I can confidently say that no one participating here, or the vast majority of Canadians and people around the world, have never experienced self-isolation like this due to pandemics like this. I know some people experienced this during SARS, but I don't think it was definitely not to this extent, right? So this is new territory for a lot of people. So by being able to identify, okay, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? How am I thinking about this situation? Where is that source of stress coming from? We can then look at those strategies that we can use. And when we look at coping strategies, we can pretty much divide them in these two sections of problem-focused and emotion-focused coping strategies. Problem-focused coping is very much hands-on, and they're great strategies to use when you're in a situation that you do have control over. So it's things like, adjusting your time management, scheduling, delegating tasks to other people, things like that, where a goal setting, where you could actually have a direct impact on the situation. Whereas emotion-focused coping is more in a situation where we don't really have much control over what's going on. What's going to happen is going to happen. So emotion-focused coping turns the control inwards, right? At the end of the day, no matter what's happening in the world or in our environment, we still have control over how we feel and what we think about. So it then turns inward and kind of leads into that third bullet of emotional regulation, or if you want to look at the wider encompassing of self-regulation, right? What do I want to feel and how do I want to feel about this situation? Because ultimately we can choose how we feel about it and how we think about it. And that's where you'll look a little bit more into the crossover of some stress management strategies, like, tactical breathing, meditation, journaling. Those are really great emotion-focused coping strategies. Social support, right? Talking to your family, peers, coworkers, friends, whoever is in that network for you. Then we have challenging perspectives. And again, this kind of pulls from that stress management and research behind stress and what causes stress. And really the gateway is that appraisal, how we see a situation, our perception on this. If we appraise a situation as, I don't have the resources or the ability to meet the demands of this situation, then the likelihood is that we're going to see it as a negative situation and go down that negative stress response. Whereas if we see it as, okay, this is going to be tough, it's a challenge, but if I put some effort in, I can look, I have the resources, I have the capabilities, I can meet the demands of this new situation, then you're going to feel more of that eustress, that positive stress, and see this as a positive challenge. So it's really changing your perspective about this situation, challenging how you're thinking and feeling about it. And then finally, refocusing strategies. Really, at the end of the day, where we put our attention is where we're going to look and how we're going to feel, right? So if we're always looking at the negatives, then we're going to feel negative about this. So just like how you can choose how you feel about a situation, you can choose where you put that focus and that attention, right? So that's where it comes in a little bit more of distraction control and noticing when, okay, I'm spending a little bit too much time thinking about how much this is not ideal. How can I switch that? Okay, what do I want to focus on right now? Let's, spend time with the family and be present in this moment with my family, or be present in this moment with the project that I'm working on.
I think a lot of what you're talking about there, Laura, is, it's not the situation that is causing us to feel stressed or anxiety. It's that mental filter, how we interpret it, and that plays a really big role in that. And yeah, all the coping strategies, things that you talked about, all that can help with either changing that perspective, changing that mental filter. So that's really what, in these times, what we need to work on. I just wanted to, there was a question there from Michael. Do you, I probably be more directed to you, Laura. Do you have any book suggestions that touch the problem and emotion-focused coping or change management in general?
Not off the top of my head, Michael. If you want, when these slides get posted, my email is on the first slide. But you'll see also at the end, there is a slide on resources. So there is a website that I posted and a link to a PDF that talks a little bit about change management, but it is more from an organizational and team point of view versus the individual. But again, in an email, I could send you some other resources on problem and emotion-focused coping strategies. And just a quick note on both of those strategies, there's no right or wrong. Some people are more problem-focused and versus emotion-focused coping. I know I'm very much a problem-focused coper. I like to have control over a situation, right? But just being aware of what your tendencies are and knowing how to read the situation is a great start to knowing that, okay, these strategies that I tend to usually use aren't going to work right now. So I know I need to switch it up, or maybe lean on those resources that I know are available to me.
Before we move on there, the last comment there by Walter, I think that's a good example of, challenging our perspective, sort of changing and saying, and hopefully, and keeping it in the back of our minds that we'll come out of this as a stronger society, family, coworkers, a country, like Walter says there. So, I wish everyone could take that perspective, because I think it would help us all to get through that. Realizing that, everyone's going to react differently. But, at least if we can get to that place of thinking, how can we be stronger when this is all over, is a good way to look at things.
Yeah, absolutely. And directly feeds into challenging that perspective. So this is a model that is very much used in organizational behavior and change management within organizations, but I believe it can directly translate into the individual as well. So first things first is the awareness of the need to change, right? When this whole thing started, we knew that as we got more information, the awareness came up that we need to change, right? We can't stay physically as close as what we were used to, doing that physical distancing. For the need for self-isolation, right? So in any sort of change management, even when you look at the literature, is really communicating as openly as possible to yourself and to your network, whether it's employees, however you want to see it, that change is coming, right? Just having those open lines of communication. Then comes the desire to support that change, right? In some ways, putting it, not living in denial or putting up those walls or resisting that change. We all need to play our part in this, right? So knowing that we need to support each other and support the guidelines or the instructions that are coming down from the chain of command to help it, kind of like Jessica said, whether we like it or not, right? We don't have to like it, but again, we all need to do our part. We all have a role in this. The knowledge of how to change, right? We can't employ change if we don't know how it works, right? So knowing what are those guidelines? What can we do, right? Because again, going back to that sense of control, we can't control what's going on right now, but we do know what we can do. There are those little things that are within our control. Ability to demonstrate the skills and behaviors to support that change. So we could have that awareness, we could have that desire to support the change, we can have the knowledge of, okay, these are the tasks that I need to do in order to support that change. But if I don't know how to apply those tasks, then again, that sets up another roadblock when it comes to change management. So, you know, bringing back that perspective from the organization, making sure your coworkers and employees have the ability to continue working from home, support the change and the guidelines that are coming from the chain of command. What are those resources that you as an individual need, and as a collective group of, you know, the CAF need to support this change? And then finally, reinforce to help make the change stick. So again, it can come both from personal and organizational perspective. First, reinforcement of personal reinforcement for that change from the personal perspective is, well, I'm self-isolating, and direct reinforcement is I'm not getting sick, and, you know, the people around me haven't gotten sick. So reinforcement, I'm doing my job and not spreading this illness. From an organizational standpoint, kind of similar in that okay, numbers wise, how many individuals in the CAF are affected by this illness, right? If those numbers are low, then great. As a CAF together, we're staying healthy. And really that's, you know, part of our job description right now is staying healthy.
I think some of the issues sometimes with change management is we think we can change everything or everything that's happening. So just knowing that controlling those things, you know, things that you have control over is a key part of that in the change process. But then accepting those things which you can't control, just accepting that, because if you try to control things that we have no control over whatsoever, that's just going to increase your stress. It's not going to be good for your mental health. So sometimes we just need to accept. We kind of need to accept what's happening right now, and then just look and sort of compartmentalize those things that we know we have control over, and sort of change in that way.
Yeah, exactly. So exercise number 2, and there's a couple of bullets here. So we don't necessarily have to go through all of them right now in terms of giving you guys time, but again, this will be posted and we can always refer back to it, but I'll go through each of them. So kind of pulling off what Derrick just said is what's within my control and how can I control it? Okay. The organization is going to do what they have to do. We're going to get these guidelines. So we don't really have much say over these guidelines, but what can I do? Again, going back to, do I need to use problem-focused coping strategies right now or more the emotion-focused coping? Okay. So what's within my control? And that's a pretty big question to ask. So a simple answer, like Jessica, stay at home. Yeah, absolutely. Stay at home.
Or as they say in Nova Scotia, stay the blazes home. So
there you go. The second bullet is, how do I want to feel about this and how can I get there? Okay. So as Derrick said, acceptance plays a pretty big role in this, but, you know, we don't have to feel that anxiety. We have some control over it and we can minimize it where we can, right? So how do I want to feel about this situation and what are those strategies that I need to do to get there? Is it, you know, having more communication with my chain of command and knowing a little bit more where I can, right? Is that an option? That's more problem focused, emotion focused. Okay, I need to make sure I set time aside for myself to regulate my emotions a little bit more. So whether that's exercise, the breathing, meditation, journaling, reading a book, you know, what can I do to get myself in that positive mindset? The 3-to-1 positive to negative ratio. This is a a direct way you can challenge that perspective. And a generic example that I use when I explain this to individuals is, you have that one negative. Let's say you come home from, in the past I would have said come home from work, but, come home from a walk or doing grocery shopping, whatever that is, and you see the sink is full of dirty dishes. And sometimes we might get frustrated about that. Like, I just want to relax. I don't really want to do the dishes. Why couldn't, so-and-so do it, right? Why is there a mess in the kitchen right now? So that's pretty easy for us to fuel that frustration and, be a negative and hold on to that. But now let's challenge ourselves. How can we turn that into a positive? Well, one positive is, seeing all these dishes after, this time away is my family got to eat, right? They had a meal together. That's a positive. Maybe they didn't do the dishes because right after the meal, they spent time together. They went for a walk. They were playing together. They watched a movie, whatever that is, right? So spending that quality time together. And then third, maybe I, was sitting quite a bit today and I didn't really get much mobility out of my day. So taking the 5-10 minutes to wash these dishes is standing at the sink. Well, that's a little bit of exercise that I got, or a little bit of not being in my chair for, however many hours that we are at our desk and our computer. So as you can see, those are not huge, positives that are like life altering, but they're those little positives that, can start changing that perspective and change your mood around that situation. So it could be hard at the beginning, difficult at the beginning to find those positives. But you'll see that after time and practice, we can start to change that negativity bias that we have in our brains. And there's even some literature showing that really positive people have a 6-to-1 ratio, but I'm not even there yet. So let's start with the 3-to-1. And then finally, develop a positive focus, going back to focusing strategies of noticing when am I distracted, what are my distractions, and where do I want my focus to be? Where does it need to be, right? And how do I get it there?
Yeah, I see Michael said he used the 3-to-1 ratio, very powerful for physical activity. So I think, that's a good point to make, because a lot of times, it does take some time to see the fruit of that labor of what you're putting into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also Walter mentioned learn to pick your battles. This could also diffuse issues at home and at work. Definitely, right? It's really easy for our brains to go to the negative, right? That's kind of what we're used to. So we need to train ourselves essentially to think positively, and using that 3-to-1 ratio is a great start. So these are questions that I recommend that you jot down these bullets and these questions so that you can then later go back to them and write down what are those controllables that I have in my domain. How do I want to feel about this? Start practicing that 3-to-1 ratio, and I would say write it out at first, and write out where you want your focus to be when you're doing certain tasks. I'm a very big proponent of writing things out, especially at the beginning, because it helps focus your train of thought. And, it makes it a little bit more concrete and tangible when you see that this piece of paper and with all these strategies that you wrote down, it gives you a great starting point to deal with this change. And then so we come to barriers that affect barriers to effective change. And it kind of pulls from goal setting. And when you're starting to set goals and you've made your plan, a really important part of that is, what are my barriers to goal setting? What is going to get in my way? So we need to ask ourselves that questions here as well. What is going to get in my way of properly engaging or implementing this change, however you want to word it? So what factors are in my environment that might impact my progress towards positive change? So, what is your living environment like? What are you an individual living alone, or do you have a family with children, right? That's going to impact your work environment. Maybe your children are younger, that you do have to help them with online school right now. So what does that look like, and how is that going to impact your change, right? A big bullet that people always tend to bring up when we talk about barriers to change is time. In this case, it might be the opposite. Now we tend to say we do have the time, right? So how do we deal with that, right? And then once you identify those barriers, what are some possible solutions to address them? Now, we're not going to address all the barriers. We might not even think of all the barriers that we might experience, but this gives you a starting point to know what those initial barriers might be. And then if and when you do experience it, you have some sort of a plan or idea how to address that barrier when it does come up, so you could effectively deal with it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I was looking at a comment earlier along the chat line there, and probably this is a barrier, and this is something that in the Stress Take Charge course that we do, that I hear time and time again, is that the stress that's created from the chain of command not knowing or not addressing your concerns. So I think it can be a bit of a barrier. Maybe it's a disconnect in communication, because I'll hear this a lot. So I'll hear members who are in the lower rank saying, well, the chain of command doesn't listen, and so that creates stress. They don't listen to our concerns. Then I'll have members of the chain of command in some of the classes, and they say, no, we want to hear the concerns. We want to address them. So I don't know what the solution is to that, if it's just more of a communications issue or what it might be, but I can definitely see where that might be a barrier where you want to see things change. But if you perceive that there's a lack of communication or addressing those issues, then that can definitely increase your stress level for sure.
Yeah. I think on top of that, it's not being afraid to voice those concerns to your chain of command. Again, they want to know, and also just being aware and a little empathetic to knowing that this is new to them as well, right? And we're getting new information every single day. So this is pretty much uncharted territory for everybody, right? So I don't know how it is with other bases, but I think I can speak, at least for myself, for 15 Wing, with the town halls that we've had. We've been getting information when we can. So I think they are trying, but if you feel that you are lacking information, then no one's a mind reader, right? So being open with those lines of communication and voicing what your needs are is really important. Yeah, as Walter said, the issue is you have to go through your chain of command. Sometimes it gets stopped before it gets to ultimately who it needs to get to. Yeah. At the end of the day, we don't have the answers to all the barriers. But again, I think a great starting point is just talking about it, right? Getting the conversation started is, in my opinion, getting the ball rolling on a lot of these issues. So again, jotting down these questions that once you've decided on, okay, what are the strategies that I want to use to affect this change that I'm experiencing? Then moving on to, okay, what are the things that might get in my way and those possible solutions? And I do recommend talking to your social network to get some ideas to those barriers, because we all have different experiences. So I might have a solution that Derrick hasn't thought of, and vice versa. So talking to each other and using that support network is a great way to get new ideas and new strategies. And then keeping in mind that I think we've all know this is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And with any sort of change, baby steps are key. If we introduce too much change at once, then we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure, right? So changing a little bit of time. And it could start with just that, your routine, right? Or your work environment. So setting up a specific place for you in your house that okay, the kitchen table is where I'm doing my work. Okay, and I talk to everybody in the household that they know from this time to this time, if possible, not to bother me because I'll be working on X project, right? So those little changes that you can start incorporating in your day to day is going to help you in the long run with effectively implementing that change for your environment. And so here are some of the resources that I mentioned earlier. The model that I talked about earlier, so the awareness, desire, knowledge, and reinforcement model. You can find it on the website link here. This website talks a lot more about change management from an organizational perspective, but they have some pretty good readings about change management that you could very easily translate to yourself as an individual. So just to answer Jessica's, I'm going to just switch back to a few slides back. And then this is the CAR model, the awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And then we also have this link to the PDF. Hopefully it works, but it's a summary of 5 dysfunctions of a team. So again, more from the organizational behavior psychology realm of teamwork. And I put this there for those of you in leadership roles that might be interested in it. And then finally, the reference there to the Green and colleagues article where I took the that quote from.
So yeah, this is actually, before I just go into this slide, you can take a look at it, but there's some helping resources we have there. There were 2 things that came up in the chat on the side that I just wanted to mention. It kind of hits home a little bit. And I think myself, I'm from Nova Scotia, and it's just me and my partner and our dog that lives here in Saskatchewan right now. So I think over the last year or so, I've sort of developed a way of dealing with being away from family and friends. But if that's something, interacting and being with family and friends that you're normally used to, it's definitely a big change. So that's one part. And then, I think with the situation of what happened in Nova Scotia a few days ago, and especially being from there, and you feel like you want to be there and you feel a bit helpless. And in this environment, I probably couldn't even go back if I wanted to, and to be with family and friends. So that's been a little bit difficult in seeing what's happening there. I know my partner has family that lives in that area where that tragedy happened. Thank God they're all fine and okay. But for those who have lost a loved one, how difficult it is for them to even, well, I can't even think about how they're going to deal with that in this COVID environment and the loss of a loved one, and just being alone is very difficult. So it's something that really needs we really need to think about. And I think that to try to process that is, if you're outside looking in, is we can't really comprehend that.
Yeah. To just answer Jessica's comment, I hope this was the slide that you were referring to. But following on what Derrick was saying, and already this is a tough time for a lot of people, and then on top of that, something like this happens. It just adds fuel to the fire and makes it even more difficult for individuals. So I think, these resources are really key and important for everybody to know about and know that you have access to it.
Yeah, and I think we definitely need to keep up to date on the information of what's happening with COVID-19. But I think part of this process as well is trying to step away from a bit of all the information that's coming our way all the time, because that can become overwhelming. So I think we're probably not used to receiving that amount of information on a daily basis. Is, we're sitting in front of our computers and the information is coming, or on our phone, and so that's probably been a bit of a change. And so we can get overwhelmed with all the information that's out there. So we need to take a break from that from time to time.
Yeah. And then, so just a final comment for these helping resources. Counseling is not just for when there's an issue, right? There doesn't have to be a problem to seek help. So even if it's just to talk about what you're experiencing and get that off your chest, these are also great resources that you can reach out to have that conversation. And so finally, I just want to thank everybody for participating. I think we, I can say on my behalf that we got some great conversation and then comments in the chat. So thank you everybody for that. Again, this will be posted. So if you weren't able to write down all the bullets in terms of the exercises and the questions, just keep an eye out for when this is posted and it'll be there for you. And those are questions that, are formatted to get you thinking about what your needs are and how you can address them directly to manage this change that we're experiencing. And I like this picture that I put. Great things never came from comfort zones, right? So change happens when we're out of our comfort zone. And so this is new territory for all of us, and some positives can come out of this. So just reminding yourself of that as well, I think will be key.
I'd say there's a question there. Who are spouses or partners supposed to reach out to? There's just going back to that last slide, the family information line would be one resource. I think as well as through local, like through the MFRCs, they're definitely there for spouses, partners, for family members there. So reach out to your local MFRC and they can help with issues as well. So those are two really good resources, I think, that people could access on that topic.
All right.
Are there any other questions or comments that people have before we end this session? I don't see any coming up. So well, thank you, Laura, and thank you everyone for participating. I just another question. Who at the MFRC? I don't know if I can answer that specifically. Would you know, Laura, or?
I would say it would depend on which base you're out of. But yeah, I would say contact them through your MFRC Facebook page. That would probably be the best bet.
Yeah, so I think it will be dependent on individual bases and wings. I just see someone commented there at the NB MFRC. There's a receptionist who's taking phone calls. So I think that would be the best way to reach out that way, or through their Facebook, social media channels, and they would connect you with the right person.
Yeah. Right. Well,
all right. Well, if that's all, thank you very much again. And be looking for more health promotion webinars. I know Laura and I will be doing more in the weeks ahead. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.